She was only 22 when she entered that marble room, lit by antique stained glass windows and sparkling chandeliers. The wedding ring sparkled on her finger like a golden ticket to a new life. The guests whispered, watching the young woman with eyes that mixed judgment and curiosity. Some said she was a gold digger. Others said she was just a girl smart enough to seize an opportunity. The fact is, everyone there knew she didn't love him. And he seemed to know it too. His name was Harold Whitmore. 73 years old. Widower, millionaire, reserved. He owned properties in at least 4 countries, was a former financial investor, and collected antique watches and silence. He always wore dark suits, spoke little, and smiled even less. In the newspapers, the marriage was described as unusual. On social media, it was called predictable. But no one there knew the whole story. Least of all her. Her name was Sophie. And yes, she was there for safety. She grew up in an orphanage, worked as a waitress, sold candy on the street at the age of 10. She was tired of fighting. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for peace. And Harold offered her that. With a contract, a ring, and a promise, in exchange for your care and companionship, everything I have will be yours. No questions asked. No strings attached. Sounds simple, right? But 7 days after that wedding, Sophie found something that wasn't part of the deal. Something that no clause could have foreseen. Something that no one could explain. And that's why you need to watch this video until the end. Because what Sophie discovered in that huge, silent house full of history will turn everything you think you know upside down. Before you continue, subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and leave a like. Because here, every story seems like fiction, until you discover that it's real. And this one, more than any other, will keep you hooked until the very last second. It all started on the 3rd day after the wedding. They had moved into the country mansion, an old property on the outskirts of Vermont, surrounded by century-old trees and a lake that reflected the sky like a mirror. The staff were discreet. The silence in the house was profound, as if every wall was accustomed to keeping secrets. Harold was kind but distant. He went to bed early and woke up before dawn. He spent hours locked in his library, a room filled with books in languages Sophie didn't even recognize. He never treated her badly. But he never treated her like a wife either. On their first night together, he handed her a key. This is your room. You will have complete freedom. I only ask that you don't go into the North Tower. She thought it was strange, but didn't ask any questions. She was there to fulfill her role. Over the next few days, Sophie explored the house. She walked through the silent corridors, looked at the old paintings, the furniture covered with cloth, the architectural details of a time that seemed to no longer exist. She found a music room with an out-of-tune piano. A garden with moss-covered statues. And old photos, some with a younger Harold, alongside a woman she assumed was his late wife. Others, with people she couldn't identify. But there was something they all had in common, their eyes. Always sad. Always avoiding the camera. On the 5th day, a storm hit the region. Strong winds, incessant rain, thunder that seemed to explode over the mansion's roof. The lights flickered. The servants retired early. Harold ate dinner in silence and went up to his room, saying he had a long video conference meeting the next morning. Sophie was left alone in the living room. The fire in the fireplace danced, reflecting off the glass. She was leafing through one of the books in the library when she heard the sound. It wasn't a crackling of wood or the normal creaking of an old house. It was a rhythmic sound, as if something was knocking. Slowly. Continuously. Like footsteps. But they weren't coming from upstairs. They were coming from below. She got up. She followed the sound. She passed through the kitchen, down the service stairs, until she found a door partially hidden behind a bookcase. It was locked. But when she touched the doorknob, she realized it was warm. As if there was something on the other side. On the 6th day, Sophie woke up before sunrise. She couldn't stop thinking about the door. Harold was more tense than usual. He avoided looking her in the eye. When she tried to ask him about the North Tower, he just said, "It's the past. Some doors aren't meant to be opened." But Sophie had already sensed it. That house was hiding something. And Harold knew exactly what it was. That afternoon, she waited until he left for his walk, a routine he followed religiously. She returned to the bookcase. She pushed it hard. Behind it, she found a small key nailed to the wall with an old nail. It fit the door. When she turned it, she felt a slight tremor under her feet. as if she had activated a forgotten mechanism. The door creaked. The hallway was narrow, dark, and spiraled downward. Sophie grabbed a flashlight and followed. Each step echoed. Each step increased the feeling that she was being watched. The air was warmer down there. As if it weren't a basement, but something alive. When she reached the end of the stairs, she found another door. Made of iron. And in the center, a kind of symbol engraved, something between a snake and a rose. When she touched it, it opened by itself. What was inside was not what she expected. A room. Circular. Lit by natural light coming through openings in the ceiling. In the center, a kind of altar with objects arranged with precision, photos, documents, books, and a box. Around it, dozens of portraits in golden frames. And they all had something in common, young women. And in the background of each image, that same mansion. Sophie felt her stomach churn. She began to examine the papers. Dates. Names. Diaries. Marriage records. Death records. Everything was detailed. Everything was meticulously organized. Each woman had married Harold. Each one under 30 years old. All at intervals of approximately 5 years. And all of them disappeared exactly 1 week after their wedding. She didn't know what to think. She was paralyzed. And that's when she heard it. A metallic click. The door behind her had closed. And the breathing coming from the darkness wasn't hers. Sophie froze. The metallic sound of the iron door closing behind her reverberated in her mind like a silent scream. The darkness that enveloped the room now seemed thicker. The photographs hanging on the walls seemed to be watching her. She was in the heart of the house. But what really terrified her was what that room seemed to represent. She ran to the door. She tried to open it. It was locked. The key had been left outside, at the top of the stairs, forgotten in her rush to get inside. She screamed. But the room was too deep, too isolated. No one would hear her. Her heart was racing. She returned to the center of the room and stared at the box on the altar. It was made of dark wood, hand-carved, with aged bronze hinges. There was a small lock, but it wasn't closed. When she opened it, she found something that looked like a diary. The first pages were blank, but soon words appeared, written by hand. The handwriting was refined and old. She was kind. She had curious eyes. Like all the others. Sophie leafed through it quickly. Each page contained the story of a woman. A different one. But they all seemed the same. They had traits in common, similar ages, similar stories. They all arrived at that house like Sophie. They all married Harold. And they all disappeared on the 7th day. She began to tremble. Every name recorded there was also in the documents she had seen before. All with matching dates, the same wedding locations, the same promises. And then, at the end of the diary, she saw something that almost made her faint. There was a photo stuck to the last page. It was her. Sophie. On her wedding day. Next to Harold. And below the image, the date. Exactly 7 days after the ceremony. The same day she was now. She dropped the diary and moved away from the altar. Her body told her to run, but there was no way out. That's when she heard footsteps. Slowly, someone was coming down the stairs. The doorknob turned. The door opened with an agonizing creak. And there, in front of her, was Harold. But he didn't look like the same man. His posture wasn't tired. His eyes weren't dull. He stood upright, firm, with an expression, empty. "Sophie," he said in a deep, clear voice, without emotion. "You went too far." She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. He descended the last few steps and entered the room, closing the door behind him. "You're not the first. And you won't be the last. But you're the only one who made it this far alone." Sophie backed away. What is this?" Harold walked to the altar. "This house holds what the world has forgotten. A cycle. A pact made many years ago. And each of you was part of it." She tried to process it. "Is this some kind of ritual?" "It's balance," he replied. "To maintain what I've built. To maintain what I am." He looked around, as if observing not the present, but all the memories of those walls. Youth. Vitality. Time, it's a price. And every time time threatens to take me away, I bring it back. Sophie understood. And at the same time, she didn't want to believe it. You sacrificed all of them, to keep living. Harold didn't answer. He just looked at her as if he already knew what she was going to do. She backed up until she was against the wall. The air was hot, thick. Her eyes searched for anything, an exit, an object, a weapon. But she found only memories. You married me knowing you would die, she asked. I married you knowing that maybe, this time, I wouldn't have to, he replied. Sophie didn't understand. What? Harold took a step forward. You were different. You read. You got involved. You asked questions. The others accepted it. They settled down. You challenged it. And that changed the rules. She felt that he wasn't lying. That something in the pact itself had been altered. Then why am I here? Because even if the rules change, the risks remain. And now, you have to choose. Harold opened his hand. Inside was a small golden key. The back door. It will take you away. But it will also take the secret with you. The cycle will continue. I will remain. You will disappear, like all the others. No one will remember. She stared at him. Or you can stay. And change everything. Sophie slowly approached him. She took the key from his hand. She felt its metallic weight. It was real. But she knew that key didn't just open a door. It opened the decision of who she wanted to be. If I leave, what happens to you? I continue. As always. And if I stay? Harold looked at the altar. The cycle will be broken. But the price will be mine. Sophie felt her eyes burn. He wasn't saying it out of fear. He was saying it with acceptance. Maybe, regret. Maybe, a desire to end something that had gone on longer than it should have. She thought about her life. How she had gotten there. Everything she had suffered to survive. And now she was faced with something no one would ever believe. But she had power. For the first time. She looked at Harold. You would give me everything you have. But what you offered me, was what you needed most. It's true. He nodded. She handed him back the key. And said, then let's end this together. If you've made it this far, you've realized that this isn't just an interesting story, or about an unlikely marriage. It's about choices. About secrets that live where no one looks. And about what happens when a woman everyone thinks is weak decides to face something no one else would dare to face. So before we reveal how it all ended, subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and leave a like. Because stories like this aren't just for entertainment, they make you rethink everything you know about fear, courage, and destiny. Click there. And pay attention. Because what Sophie did next, no one ever expected. She returned the key. And in that silent gesture, something inside the mansion seemed to take a deep breath for the first time in decades. It was as if the house itself had been waiting for that decision. As if the place, the paintings, the books, and the hidden room had been created just to lead her to that moment. Harold didn't smile. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded, as if acknowledging that the end had finally come. He walked to the center of the room, where the altar stood in silence, and reached for the diary. Everything I was is here, he said. Everything I became, too. Sophie looked around. The photos on the walls seemed clearer. The women in the portraits no longer looked scared, but rather, free. As if their stories had finally been seen. And now, she asked. Harold sat down slowly. His body seemed weaker. His shoulders were hunched. His expression was calm. Now, the house will decide. Before she could answer, a light breeze began to circulate through the room. The light coming through the cracks in the ceiling became more intense, almost golden. The papers on the altar moved by themselves. The candles lit up, even without fire. Sophie instinctively backed away. But Harold remained motionless. At peace. The entire room was filled with a silent warmth. It wasn't scary. It was serene. As if everything was slowly falling apart. The walls began to lose their color. The frames faded away. The words in the books disappeared like sand blown away by the wind. And then, with a single sigh, Harold fell forward. Sophie rushed to him. But before she could touch him, his body began to disintegrate. Not into blood. Not into pain. But into light. As if, deep down, he had never been just flesh. As if he were part of that place. Part of the pact. And now, free. When it was over, the room was empty. There was no altar. No portraits. No books. Just the cold, silent structure of a stone chamber with a single exit, the staircase from which she had come. Sophie climbed silently. Outside, night had fallen. The mansion looked different. Lighter. The walls less oppressive. The garden was more alive. The servants had disappeared. There was no sign of human life beyond her. In the days that followed, no one came looking for Harold. No newspaper reported his disappearance. No lawyer. No relatives. It was as if he had never existed. And, in a way, maybe that was true. But Sophie had proof. She had kept the diary. Not physically. But in her memories. And when she went to check the will registered at the city clerk's office, she found a surprise: everything was now in her name. The mansion, the bills, the assets. As if Harold had predicted exactly this outcome. As if, in fact, everything had been planned. But she didn't stay there. Sophie sold the properties. She traveled for months. She studied. She researched. She discovered that the symbol in the living room appeared in ancient records, linked to forgotten traditions. Sacrifices for longevity. Pacts of vital exchange. Silent rituals performed between four walls, like those Harold had probably participated in the past. She understood that his story was not unique. But it was the only one that had come to an end. With her inherited resources, she created a foundation. Aimed at taking in women at risk. She named the project after a book she found in the library before the room disappeared, A Golden Choice. Because in the end, that's what she did. She chose. And she transformed what was a cycle of destruction into a new beginning. A year later, Sophie returned to the city. She visited the old mansion. It was empty. Abandoned. As if no one had ever lived there. But as she walked through the garden, she found a small plaque stuck next to a flower she didn't recognize. It read, "When one breaks the chain, all others breathe again." She understood what it meant. That decision saved not only herself, but all those who came before her. And perhaps, even those who would come after her. Today, Sophie lives a simple life. Far from the city. She works as a teacher. She loves her job and her students. She is a happy woman. She understood what it meant. That decision saved not only herself, but all those who came before her. And perhaps, even those who would come after her. Today, Sophie lives a simple life. Far from the newspapers. Far from the glamour that once surrounded her. But close to what she never had before, truth. And freedom. And if you think this story ends here, know that it doesn't. Because a few days ago, when opening a letter with no return address, Sophie found something unexpected, a handwritten letter, with handwriting she recognized immediately. Not everything has been erased. Some cycles only sleep. And some pacts have siblings. And along with the letter, a photo. It was her. Sitting on a chair in the Foundation's garden. Taken from a distance. Recently. Someone was watching. And the chain, maybe it hasn't been completely broken yet.